Hey, hello. Hey, healthcare leaders. Do you want to know how simple things that you take for granted, mundane things that you think sometimes, why do we even have to do? Things like board development, things like your hospital board and why you need physicians on it. Or where did this whole thing start with physician leadership development? Now, they sound two very different things, yeah? However, what if I told you not only are they connected, they can be very powerful tools to engage physicians. So while you're doing one thing, if you do it properly, you can also do a lot of physician engagement, which leads to what? Hospital profits, which lead to what? Quality, what? Safety. So everything that you do that's connected to physician engagement can be done through these things that you may not even know how to do it properly. So for today, we have a treat for you. We have an expert who's a physician leader, but in many ways, he's physician leaders leader because he has founded these things. And as we discussed today, you will see that it's just as important to know what to do, but also to know what not to do. And for somebody who has actually spent a whole career, at this point, 50 years, doing these things in the service of medicine and in the service of physician leadership, we have a person like that here, Dr. Satiani, Bhagwan Satiani from Ohio. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
Arjun. Yeah.
Yes.
Nice to be here.
And I'm very proud to also know him as my co-author of these twin books. You know these books. We have
Yes.
talked about them, and Enhanced Physician Engagement, the twin books of strategy and tactics. And he has two chapters in it. One on board development, hospital board development, and how that is a solid opportunity for physician engagement, and physician leadership academy development, which itself is a very deep topic, and how that is an opportunity for not only physician engagement, but also long-term hospital sustainability. So he has two, and we'll talk about both of them today. Okay, so let's get going. Dr. Satiani, do you want to say something about your career before we get going?
Well, the reason I came to these issues is because I had a physical problem with my neck. And I started to look 10 years ahead, 15 years ahead, say and I love teaching. So I thought, okay, how do I combine my love for teaching and physician development? I was doing this in private practice also before I got to the academic medical center. So that was my issue, how to take my passion for teaching and developing physicians versus making them capable of leading others. And my issue was I was early enough to spot my weaknesses. Mm. The impetus for me was looking to see where I was. I found I didn't have the knowledge base. I didn't have the self-awareness to realize why I couldn't be a leader at that point. And I saw it in other physicians. So I thought, okay, here's where I'm at. Here's what I'm going to do to put this into practice and develop physicians. So that's what started in around year 2000. Before that, I was intermittently teaching, but that's when the focus really hit. So that's the start of it. As far as career, I was in private practice for 24 years. And then our whole group moved into the academic center. And I cut back a lot because of physical issues on the practice part. And then I started this Faculty Leadership Institute at Ohio State for Department of Surgery. And the dean looked at it and said, wait a minute, what about the rest of the faculty? So I started this cohorts of maybe 30 people, not all 100% physicians. We had other people from health sciences, other people, 3 or 4 or 5 a year. So that's how it started. And I stepped back in end of 2018 because I thought I'd had 8, 9 years I wanted a younger person to take over and lead this forward. So that's where I got there. As far as the board, I think I was the medical staff president of the hospital, which was merging like we are these days with another larger hospital to make a single whole health system. I was right in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned a lot, saw bad and good leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, I saw the need for physicians and in fact, clinicians to be on the board. So that was the combination.
I think that it's a very humble thing that you shared, that you looked at your weaknesses, things that you could not do, and that you needed to develop in yourself first before you could ask anybody else to do it.
Yes.
So when you're by the way, what year were you on the board?
I was 1989, 4 years, somewhere around there, 88,
Okay.
89. I was president of medical staff. Before that, we all go through the whole hierarchy of going through positions. But at that point, I was in a state where we were merging.
Okay.
And so it was a really important time and place. And in fact, I was on the committee to choose the next CEO.
I see.
And so I got to know the board members, how to operate it, and what, as physicians, we needed to do. And the one thing I heard pretty openly from the lay board, I mean, non-physicians, was physicians weren't ready to be on the board.
So okay. So before you even started doing physician leadership development and others, you were on the board.
Yes.
Oh, that's very interesting, because how did that feel to you when people were saying, well, doctors are not ready?
Well, they wouldn't come out in plain language, but it was pretty obvious when the vote happened, this and that. They pretty much assumed you'd go along and say yes, because there are several reasons. One is physicians are intimidated.
Okay.
Two, they don't understand the rules.
Okay.
They don't understand what's going on. They just got there. You're on the board for 2 years before and 2 years afterwards, but it takes a year to figure out what the heck is going on.
Yes.
And then my experience was the CEO did not like to see, he was a friend of mine, but he did not like to see the physicians buttonhole board members on their own.
Okay.
Because they don't know, for one thing, they're correct. They don't know what you're telling them, whether you're telling them what's right or not. So it was the same thing. They looked at you like, okay, you're a great clinician, good doctor, but you know nothing about this.
So let me ask you, from the hardcore physician engagement perspective, your chapter, which is the roles of boards of trustees, how will or why would that chapter appeal to a healthcare leader who is seeking engagement from their doctors?
If you look at the functions of a hospital board, basically the two major functions, there are only two. One is evaluate the CEO.
Okay.
Okay, that's their role. Number two, legally and ethically, they're responsible for the clinical care quality. Those are two of the important duties of the board. And if you expect the lay board to be in charge of quality and not have great clinicians on the board, it's a real problem. And where boards go wrong is where they don't have strong clinicians on the board, where they make mistakes. So now these days, as you know, the legally, it's become an issue as far as not quality assurance, as far as not looking over things. So not just physicians, but nurses also who are experts in this area. So for physicians, the way to get in a hospital board is, other than ex officio, where you're just the board position is because you're an officer in some capacity. That's ex officio, but you don't have a vote.
Yes.
So you have to really understand the quality and clinical care point of view. You don't have to have a degree in quality, but I think you have to have good experience and knowledge of the area because they will listen to you. You just have to be very solid in the facts and what's going on as far as the policies nationally are concerned.
So, in a way that a doctor brings technical expertise to the board, but how does this help in doctors getting engaged?
Because one, you're in charge of a major part of a system in the hospital.
Mhm.
And two, all the physicians are affected by this, right? Quality affects every physician in the hospital. So if
Mhm.
you're strong or the person representing you is strong,
Mhm.
the hospital looks at you to be their interaction with all physicians. Once you're in charge of that,
Mhm.
you are basically the person responsible for engaging with physicians. So the hospital feels closer, physicians as a whole, because you're listening to your friends and other physicians, and they're listening to you.
Mhm.
So that's a very powerful engagement measure for the hospital and the physicians. This, in fact, this is one area where I think the differences can be very small and gotten closer
Oh, I
between the
see.
hospital and physicians.
Now, you also discussed that there are barriers to having doctors on the board. So, in fact, this is the first time I have read those barriers in such detail. If anybody's really looking for the legal issues around it, they should really read this chapter in detail, take notes, and even discuss it. I wish this chapter was read in boards themselves. So this chapter itself is like something that is like a book club thing to be read in a hospital board. So how did you come across these barriers and how did you see them play in board development?
Well, one of the things I was told, and I'm not an attorney, so the law might be changing or change, but the
Mhm.
hospital always give. If you look at nationally, even 3-4 years ago,
Mhm.
the median number of physicians on a hospital board, non-academic hospital board, between 1 and 2.
Ooh.
Average is 2.5. The median is 1 physician on a hospital board. And you ask, why is that?
Mhm.
Why don't you have more physicians on the board? They give the reason that for a not-profit hospital, not-for-profit, there are IRS issues,
Mhm.
revenue service, Internal Revenue Service limits. From what I understand, back then you couldn't have more than 40% of the board as physicians back when I was there.
Mhm.
I'm not sure what the rule is now, but the IRS kind of frowns on too many physicians, especially if there's a self-interest.
Mhm.
For example, if you own a company or something else and it's a conflict, you're a purchaser of services in the hospital, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So they frown on that. But I don't see any reason why they cannot have more than 1 physician on a hospital board. Let's say the average board size is 10 or 12.
Mhm.
That's 10%.
Mhm.
There has to be more pressure
Mhm.
by physicians
Mhm.
to have more clinicians on hospital boards.
Mhm.
Really do. But their excuse is 1, legal, and 2, they don't feel that you are qualified to make those decisions on the board. Yeah.
Hmm.
Besides the quality. You don't have, they discuss a lot of business.
Mhm.
Most physicians come in and look at the financial statements. They don't even know what they're looking at.
Yes, and that kind of like leads into the other chapter which is about physician leadership
Right.
development. But
Yeah.
let's stick to the board right now.
Yeah.
So these IRS limitations are a problem in having physicians on the board. You also discussed, by the way, Sarbanes-Oxley limitations, which can be a huge problem as far as having physicians on the board.
But they changed though. Even Sarbanes-Oxley over the last 5 or 6, 8 years, since the law was passed, what, in the 80s or something? What year was that?
No, I think 2002.
2002,
Sarbanes-Oxley was in 2002-ish.
late
You can
90s.
look it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the the other excuse that I mentioned in the chapter is
Yeah, 2002.
2002.
Yeah.
When you get on the board, you are told that it's your fiduciary duty
Mm-hmm.
to represent the board, not the physicians or the medical staff.
Mm-hmm.
So that creates some, what I call cognitive dissonance. You pretty much say, it is. I mean, you look at it and you say, wait a minute, I'm here because I'm supposed to represent the physicians. And now I'm being told, no, you have fiduciary duty because you're on the board of voting member to represent the board.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, okay, I know which side my heart is at. So what am I supposed to do? And that's where actually you get into trouble as a board member with physicians. You know what they come to you and say, you know what we're thinking, what our problem is.
Mm-hmm.
And you're still voting this way or that way. So you have to explain some limitations, but it doesn't stop you or shouldn't from speaking out.
I see.
That comes from knowledge. You have to speak out for the physicians.
So in the chapter, you describe in great detail how the leader of a healthcare outfit, doctor or not, can get doctors in almost like a pipeline to be on the board. So in that process, what's the most important step?
See, the board, physicians on the board are basically nominated, right? So
Yes.
the nominating committee of the board, mostly lay people, are influenced by the CEO. So the CEO has to notice not only which physician's incompetent, knowledgeable, has the right temperament to be on the board. And of course, they're looking for people who are more favorable inclined to the hospital. But at least you're fair. I mean, they have to see that part of it, knowledge, temperament, and fairness. And they're the ones that actually approach people to be on the board. And the way to do it is start with small officers' positions. Get up to chair whatever department, divisions you're at, run the quality assurance committee, run the physician impairment committee, be on the executive. You know that you've handled difficult problem solutions, that you can fairly resolve these and deal with them. I think that kind of makes you noticed. And then the CEO and their staff come and ask you.
I see. So what do you think that, like in older like MECs, people would elect a leader, elect a president who will have like a 2-year term, and then they would go away and somebody else would come in. So what do you think of that kind of physician leadership presence? Is like 2 years enough to learn what to do or not? What do you think?
That's the way it was in my time. But I think the issue now is with a lot of physicians being employed by hospitals. They still run elections, as far as I can tell, looking at it. But they're heavily influenced by who the hospital wants in those positions, right? I mean, there's voting going on, but I think hospitals have a position and who they want, and that's kind of known. But those 3 things I mentioned, they're still in play.
Oh, I see.
I mean, they still want to see somebody who's got knowledge, who's got the temperament, and is going to be fair in dealing with the issues.
In fact, your chapter on the board development has a very interesting take on how this process will also help the board become stronger if people from diverse backgrounds, not just training backgrounds, but also, ethnic backgrounds or gender backgrounds are invited in. Let me ask you to discuss this diagram you have in the chapter. And it's so interesting to look at this, and it's almost like a snapshot. So tell us about this.
So this is, I basically looked at the demographics in the hospital board. This was, we did this survey, a medical student and I did this survey probably 2012, right? So,
Mhm, mhm,
and the data was 2, 3 years before. I doubt if much has changed.
mhm,
I mean, if you look at faith-based versus so-called secular
mhm,
not-for-profit boards,
mhm,
um, I mean, there is a difference. You can kind of see that on your screen.
mhm,
But as far as the um, racial diversity
mhm,
has not changed. I
mhm,
mean, it's pretty much the same. But
mhm.
I bet you, if you look at the last 5 years, I think if you look back 5 years from now and look at today's time, you will have seen the changes, just like there is in the corporate sector.
Okay.
So, but I mean, there's certain um, restrictive things that are happening in faith-based versus secular. The
Okay.
two systems run kind of differently, as you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you see, what I am impressed by is this, to see creating diversity as an opportunity, not as a problem, not as, it's just to control managerial behavior, or because if we don't do it, we'll get sued or something like that. Versus, look, this is such a great opportunity. And you can have people running the hospital who are bringing their strengths to the table. But you have to consciously do it. Like you said, the CEO has to start doing it. And this is an opportunity to engage physicians of diverse backgrounds as well. This is such an impressive diagram, this one, this graphic, and this. If you look at it, it has a very strong message, at least to me.
I think the hospitals are pretty much following the rest of the corporate sector.
Oh, I
I
see.
really do. I think you'll notice, as you know, you look at big corporations now, and you're right. I'm impressed by what you said in the sense that you shouldn't want somebody to do it because everybody else is doing it, or I
Mm-hmm.
want to look good,
Mm-hmm.
kind of virtue signaling out there. It
Mm-hmm.
really is an advantage
Mm-hmm.
because they have different backgrounds. They think of things done differently, where they come from, or what they've experienced. It's a big plus. In my mind, it is.
In
My
fact,
experience is not going to be the same as somebody else.
you already told like too many stories about board development and your
Yeah.
experience in it. But was there something that inspired you to write this chapter? It's like I'm even surprised that this chapter exists in a book on physician engagement. What inspired you to write this chapter?
You're so right. You won't find much. I looked and looked, my medical student and I looked, and there just wasn't much. Now, there's stuff in ACHE, American College of Healthcare Executives,
Mm-hmm.
on boards,
Mm-hmm.
but even in American College of Physician Leaders, there's not much. In fact, that's a great idea. I think I'm going to update this thing
Mm-hmm.
for that journal. I
Mm-hmm.
did because I saw what was going on the board in 4 years. And I was thinking, for physicians, like you're talking about, how do we get more physicians on the board other than changing the mindset of the CEO
Mm-hmm.
and impressing on them that it's to your advantage that you need more clinicians on the board. Um, so that's what impressed me. I thought we have to get more people on there. So I told my medical student, I said, look, let's just look and see where we are right now. And I was struck. I'm thinking median of one physician.
Yes.
And this is insane in this world where all the work is done by physicians, and you have one person representing us on the board.
Yes. You make 8 recommendations at the end
Yeah.
about what to do. And to me, the one that stood out the most, because I had never thought about that, which is that doctors can shadow senior executives, as if doctors
That
don't
was
have the.
my
Yeah, go ahead.
that,
Tell me more. Tell us more about
no,
that
that
one.
that was my that advice was for hospitals,
Okay.
hospital CEOs and other people. They often say, well, they're not ready, they're not ready. I said, if you think somebody's got those 3 things I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
why don't you have them shadow somebody? We do for masters in healthcare administration for executives, right?
Mm-hmm.
We do it for medical students.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you go ahead and have people who you think half a day a week Have somebody shadow a senior hospital administrator that's actually on the board. Show them what you do and how decisions are made. And the board shouldn't have a problem having an occasional physician guest, non-voting,
Yes.
just see what goes on. They don't do it, but I think that was one of probably the most important thing that they can do. And if I were a physician and I was looking at that position, that's what I would ask.
I
I'd go
was
to the
very
CEO.
impressed this eight-pronged approach that you explained. But this one thing, which is such an innocent thing to do, it's like something that can open doors, crack open this black box of the board to doctors and say, why don't you just go shadow? And doctors are used to shadowing people. That's like such an easy thing to do.
And the most important part for hospitals, if I'd go talk to somebody, I'd say, hey, it doesn't cost you a cent.
Yes.
In fact, it may cost me because I'm taking half a day off of my work and practice, right?
Yes.
So, but I want to do this. I want to help you. I want to help the hospital. So let's do it.
And these days, there is definitely a great interest in giving admin time to doctors. And admin time typically gets used for completing notes. But admin time can be used to develop doctors, and doctors can do it themselves as well. You have a message for doctors too. So we're talking so far to hospital leaders and CEOs and physician leaders, but you have a message for the doctors too about how or what can be like a brief checklist for a doctor who wants to sit on the board. Let's talk about this. So tell us about what is like the most important thing in this checklist that you have in this chapter.
I think the first one. The first one is why are you doing this? It's like a lot of physicians in my leadership classes always came up and said, should I get an MBA for this? I said, why are you doing this? It's the same thing you were probably asked when you went for your medical school interview or whatever. Why are you doing this? So you got to look at your motives. I think once you convince yourself, this is what I want, this is my motivation, it's not the same as a layperson wanting to get on the board. A lot of their motivation is they want the prestige that comes with the appointment. You and I probably wouldn't care. We want to be there. We want to influence how the hospitals makes decisions, how the quality part and clinical care is looked at, how our physicians treat it as far as, the due process part of it. There are all kinds of issues why we as physicians want to be on the board. The other stuff comes later as far as you having the time, because once you're on the board, you got to commit. You got to commit with the time. It's not just the board meeting. If you've ever been on one, it's hours spent looking at documents, looking at packages that they send you ahead of time. You have to be ready and learn about what they send you. To me, that's the number one question. If I were on the hospital board, I'd be looking at why. Answer that, and the rest falls into place.
This is such a great list. It's like you have to say like an absolute yes to all of these questions. And really, it will send you on some soul searching or learning and training process. That this checklist can also be used almost like a CEO can use it and say, hey, doctor, you want to be on the board? Do you have the motivation? Why do you want to be on the board? It's almost like a board member interview before someone can be invited. I love this checklist.
Yeah, and you notice that looking at those tables, they didn't come from anywhere. This is just my experience. Just say, okay, I made it easy for somebody to say, okay, I don't have time to read this. Let me look at the list from a hospital and physician standpoint and see, is this doable? Do I really want to do this? And I think there it is.
And what will it take?
Yeah.
What is it going to take?
The distillation comes down to, okay, this is the bottom line.
Let's talk about the other chapter, which is about, this is like a nice segue because we're talking about not only physician development for the board, but also physician development as a doctor, as a physician leader themselves. So why would that chapter interest a healthcare leader?
The reason more physicians are doing this now than before, not one reason, there's several. In my case, it was, like I mentioned before, I just love developing physicians, starting not on the clinical basis from residents and students, which I have for years, but one step up. The senior most person I had trained was fellows in vascular surgery, but this was a higher calling as far as I was concerned, teaching them. You say, well, why was the hospital be interested? The department chair actually started this.
Okay.
He said to me, you know, I don't have a succession plan.
No.
Nobody here has a succession plan here. None of the department chairs. What do you think about that? He said, you've had this MBA degree, and you know how loosely they talk. I was thinking to myself, it had nothing to do with the graduate education, right? Nothing.
Yes.
I said, if you really want a good succession plan, you need a pipeline. You need a pipeline of people who are ready and willing to do this. Well, how do I get there? I said, you got to train them. You got to train them, and you got two options.
Mm-hmm.
You can go outside, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pay for it, send them out. You lose income, time, and all this stuff, or intramural.
Mm-hmm.
You develop inside.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as expensive, and plus you can pick the kind of people you want. You can have local control. They don't have to travel anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it started.
You described the whole story very well in the program. And I also run a small program called D2L, Developing Doctors into Leaders, which is more of an introduction to leadership. But you went very deep into the hierarchy of doctors, the hierarchy of hospital, and how to make it possible, not just from money perspective, but also time and effort perspective. How did you, what was the key in engaging? First of all, let's talk about engaging leadership in saying we need to do this. What was the key to success in there?
I think if you look at most hospitals, as you know, they do surveys every couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And they look at different companies, you know, come in and do surveys, and they tell them what's the score, what's the engagement score, how does it compare nationally. And so ours was pretty low. Hadn't changed in 2 or 3 different surveys. And they were looking around, and you know how they go. They go around, well, let's give out some Doctor's Day gifts, or you know, this, it just doesn't work. So my advice was, if you want people making decisions, you want better engagement, you have got to have trained physicians put in positions where they can actually influence decision making. Physicians get upset when decisions are made where they're not part of the decision making process. People don't know what they're thinking, and decisions, you don't ask them, you want buy-in. You just come in and say, let's have these people buy into the decision after it's made. I think that's what irritates most physicians.
Yes.
You know, no one buy in. Ask me before you make the decision, not afterwards. And the only way you get it right, if you train people to understand why a decision is being made, what's the reason for those decisions, and then they can go explain to the rest of the medical staff from an engagement perspective, their peer coming out and telling them. And if you have a peer in every subgroup, let's say I have a class of 30 I put out. And so a lot of the distribution, when we ended up looking, we got most of departments over an 8-year period, at least 3 people in each department.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them ended up staying. So
Mm-hmm.
think about it. You have a representative who's been trained at least 2 or 3 of those in each department.
Mm-hmm.
They're the people other physicians will go to for their answers.
Mm-hmm.
That's engagement. And
Oh.
so they know they're connected to hospital administration through those people that you have trained.
So,
And
but-
conversely, the hospital administration, other than sending out emails or text messages or whatever, bulletins, doesn't work.
yes.
You have to have personal relationships. And if you have 1,000 physicians on there,
Mm-hmm.
how do you get personal relations? You don't. So you've got to get enough people that you have confidence in that are being trained to communicate through those people.
Mm-hmm.
That's engagement.
Who can then have personal relationship down
Who can have, yes.
down the chain. I see.
Yeah.
You see, for this has been a much longer process for you developing this.
Yes.
And we talked about motivation. What motivated you to continue doing this? I understand the hospital's motivation was to engage doctors. What motivated you?
Pretty selfish, actually. I was seeing results.
Oh, I see.
I was seeing the first couple of classes. The first one was just totally surgeons because we started from the Department of Surgery. And then the next group, I was getting feedback from not only the departmental people,
Mm-hmm.
but people one level up, not the senior most administration, but 1 or 2 levels up,
Mm-hmm.
saying how these people have brought their knowledge and temperament.
Mm-hmm.
And they were giving feedback to their department. Every time we would do something, they would go back to their departments, report back in the minutes
Mm-hmm.
in the department meetings, say, okay, this is what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So you got feedback from candidates, people who had finished the class,
Mm-hmm.
saying, this is what I'm doing with what I've been taught.
Mm-hmm.
And we do surveys. So we have a pretty good idea what people are doing. You know, we've got a database now going back, 11 years now of these
Yeah.
people.
No, I read what people were saying. You described that in your chapter too.
Yeah.
But now let's say you have a hospital set up where there are 20 departments, 20 medical directors, and everybody's like elected for a term of 2 years or so. So how do you know, or how will the CEO who's, let's say, trying to do this with the CMO, how would they know which medical director is going to be invited into this? Or they invite and half of them are like, no, we don't want to do this. So how do you tackle at that level?
First, somebody wants to do this. What I did was call around.
Okay.
At that time, there were only 2 or 3 programs around the country.
Mm-hmm.
So I called around, phone calls, trying to see how they put it together. There wasn't much reading wise from physician leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So then I put together from what I could gather and read a program, a curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
and then what sessions were going to be on. Once I had a basic outline, I met with the chairs separately
Mm-hmm.
and said, this is a proposal. This is how much it's going to cost.
Mm-hmm.
Your division, department, whatever, they're going to pay for however many people you send per person.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's why we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you in? Are you out?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is, and with no exceptions,
Mm-hmm.
everybody said, we would love to have this, and they were pushing to have more and more people. And the pressure was on me. Everybody said, oh, you need more minorities. You need more women. You need more. And actually, I didn't have to finagle anything.
Okay.
You have great people around you. I do.
Yeah.
And so I put out a call for nominations.
Okay.
And first year, we got like 60
Okay.
or 68 or something.
Okay.
So then I had a committee, not me,
Mm-hmm.
4 or 5 other people. We figured out how we were going to grade these.
Mm-hmm.
And we just graded them down, and the top 30
Mm-hmm.
got in. And then we basically ask people the same question. Why do you want to do this?
I see. And 60 out of how many?
68, I don't know, 800.
Okay, so about like 10% people were invited in for this, and then 30 got selected.
No, actually, the email went out to everybody.
Okay, I see. Okay.
But it's a commitment. As you read, it's a commitment. People,
Yes.
busy clinicians, people who are this, that, and the other, have multiple campuses. They have physical limitations too. So I
Yes.
didn't expect that many. And
Yes.
so that's still quite a bit.
Yes. In fact, now it's easier. You can run some of it virtually, and then,
Yeah.
but back in the day, they had to actually physically
Yeah.
come
We
and
had
commit.
actually, for this program, we wanted physical presence because a lot of teaching is in between. Zoom for me during the COVID thing didn't work very well.
Okay.
This was a collective. Plus, the other advantage of doing this in a big campus, people got to know each other.
Yes.
People get to know each other. When you have a problem, you pick up the other leader who's been through hey, can you help me with this?
Yes.
I mean, it was a great, they all commented, you couldn't say anything bad about somebody who's been next to you learning.
Yes. And so through the years, you have gone, and you describe in the chapter how many different topics and chapters you tried, how many different variations, and then figured out these are the ones which are most important. So let me show you, tell us about this diagram, which is about the program itself. So let's take a look, which is the curriculum. And for the last year for the physician leadership. So tell us about, how did you get down to these topics?
So this curriculum was a transitional curriculum, actually. At the time I was leaving, and we were planning the new one.
Okay.
So for example, change management, it's a very common curriculum topic. Now I look around, it's pretty common. For somebody who's going to be a leader, you pretty much have to understand when the need for changes, how do you encourage change, how do you deal with it as a leader, how to communicate the change, all these things that go with it. So strategy, very common. I mean, it's in most executive type programs. Decision making, and a lot of physicians mistake this for clinical decision making. It's not. It has to do with actually there's a little bit of science behind how decisions are made and problem solving. So that goes with it. Negotiations, again, is a very common thing. And of course, that's personal as professional life. Communication is, again, very common. We use a textbook. We gave out probably 5 or 6, not textbooks, books during the year, starting with leadership. I changed a couple of books during the time, depending on, what the pros and cons were. Team building is probably the most important one, and the one that actually people appreciated the most, because we had in this thing a person who taught them about their own leadership and communication style, so they could figure out what they were about, and then taught them how to deal with people who have different personalities and behavioral styles. So that was really important, and there was a reading a book with it. So it goes on like that. It's pretty much bring it down to 10 or 11 topics, and then the final one was basically they had to do a project, a capstone project for the end of the year, where each team of 5 physicians would work together for 2.5 months, and they would be a couple of honors and prizes and things at the end. And we would invite executives and their chairs, people to come and listen. So,
even more people to come in and listen.
Participants.
Oh, I see. Okay.
We had an auditorium pretty full for people wanting to know what
was it?
they've done for the year, what projects they have.
Oh, I see. So, uh, you mentioned that some resources you use as the core. So tell us about those.
The problem always is finding the right kind of people to teach.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, in some of those, I don't have the skills to teach it.
Mm-hmm.
So I used some university faculty, probably 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
In most academic, at least, programs, you'll see they'll get everybody from the business school that's associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted that. I said, no, I'm not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you pretty much get the same textbook style
Oh, I see.
teaching.
Uh-huh.
Here's the thing, here's the book, no, I don't want that.
Okay.
So half of the facilitators, I don't call them speakers, I call them facilitators.
Mm-hmm.
The idea was to communicate and facilitate and not show a bunch of slides.
Yes.
Didn't want it.
Yes.
So I invited 5 of those 11 or six maybe were from the consulting industry or teaching or coaching or
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. Just
Mm-hmm.
people out in the real world, as I call it.
I see.
And so I changed those based on feedback. If somebody wasn't communicating, and the most important thing for me was to talk or communicate with the person who is going to facilitate, to make them aware, this is what I want.
Yeah.
This is what I need.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I'm going to hold you to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's you can't just give them, say, okay, here's the topic.
I think we got very deep into what happens during such an academy that's running and how to make sure that the participants are engaged and the return on investment is seen. And you were talking about the principles of how to teach adult learners versus even you can't even do that to children anymore. But
Yeah.
it's like sit down and remember your tables versus, well, let's figure out what are you going to do with that information and starting like that. What books did you find essential to this endeavor?
Probably the leadership. You probably never heard of this book. I picked it because it's small and has not much theory in it. I can get you I can get you 6 books that have a lot of theory and this and that. I mean, this is called Leader as a Mensch.
Oh.
Are you familiar with Mensch part of it? Okay.
Well, I know it, but please tell us about the Mensch.
It's a Yiddish term, So she's Canadian, and I ran across it somewhere. And I started reading it, and I thought, oh, this is really good. It's very easy reading, but it makes the points. Some people say it's simplistic. I don't think so. I think it's motivational as well as talking about leadership. You need a little bit of both. Okay. Can't just speak hard science and topics all the time.
Yes.
So teams, we use Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. We use that. Negotiations, we used a faculty member who's got a book he couldn't give out. We had him cheat and copy the 2 chapters I wanted.
Okay.
So yeah, it's So I mixed and matched about what kind of things I thought I was impressed with, and we just used it. Yeah.
I think what you said earlier about even doctors learning that other people are different than them and they are still just as high functioning as they are. With all the differences in styles and behaviors, they can be just as effective. And in fact, it's a good thing to have someone who's different than you. Then you don't want somebody exactly just like you. So
that's interesting, Arjo. When we put the teams together ahead of class, we didn't just randomly put them.
Okay.
530 people. I looked at gender, looked at ethnicity, kind of looking at this with departments. For example, I would not put 4 surgeons in one group and 4 PC. No, I don't want that.
Oh, I see.
I want people to get to know the other person because I know their behaviors are going to be different. So I would put them in teams to see what the interaction would be. And it's
Mhm.
very rare that they had any problems. I recall one team, one person wanted to move to
Mhm.
another, but rarely. They
Mhm.
got along well. And that's part of teaching. That's
Mhm.
part of leadership. You got to
Yeah.
learn to respect the people on your team. You got to learn how to communicate, how to talk with them. And most important thing, how to listen to them.
Yes.
That came out of it.
What advice would you give to a young physician? You see, we talk about leadership but
Yeah.
everything is fair game. Because what I see is that sometimes I meet medical students or residents, and there's a sense of despair as opposed to excitement about what's coming in their career and life. What advice do you give to a young doctor or a medical student?
First, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I would still encourage people who want to go to medicine, absolutely do. If you ask me what I would do again, I'd do what I did.
Mhm.
So there's change,
Mhm.
learning to adjust with change. You're going to have to. There's just no way around it.
Mhm.
But if you're in it for the right reason,
Mhm.
and I will go back to motivation again, and
Mhm.
I will ask you if you're a young person, the most important thing in my mind that you
Mhm.
can do is write a personal mission statement.
Mhm.
I wrote one 25 years ago. I know what it is. I
Mhm.
know what was important in my life,
Mhm.
and I'm sticking by it. You can change it if you want, but it's
Mhm.
only 6, 7 sentences. I know
Mhm.
what it is that's important to me. So
Mhm.
if healing and taking care of people is important to you, don't worry about the other stuff coming and happening. Because if you
Mhm.
worry about it, you won't be happy.
Mm.
Write your own.
That is so important. That
I
is
still have it.
so very
Yeah,
important.
I know what it is, know where my priorities are, right? That's,
Yes, and that's what gives meaning to life.
yeah.
That's where knowing what it's almost like something that gives you the sense of direction as
So that
well.
was important to me to be a healer, to be a teacher. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
those things, besides the spiritual part of it, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, those are all things in my mission statement, and I'm sticking by it. Yeah.
I'm thinking that, um, and if you don't know, Dr. Satiani, as a surgeon, has been not only entrepreneurial, but has been, as surgery changed through the decades, he is known, and you can see his other interview on that one of his students, who is the CEO now of the hospital system, he's interviewing Dr. Satiani, and they talk about how he was always at the cutting edge of technology and how doing that also keeps not only on your toes, but also takes away this fear. You have to go without fear. It is such an impressive interview to know that this kind of philosophy isn't just about, like you put something in your kitchen or something. It's something that is to be lived. So I have to ask you, in your surgical career, how did you use this philosophy? So we talked about your leadership, you
Yeah.
teaching other leaders, you creating avenues and framework for other doctors to become leaders. Let's talk about you as a surgeon. So what kept you fresh and going without fear over there?
I come back to what I went into medicine for. And I decided I was going to do whatever it takes to be the best in my profession, to
Mhm.
be the best doctor. And that's my mission statement,
Mhm.
is to be the best doctor I could for my patients. If it involves learning a new technique, learning something, doing something differently, since it's ingrained in me,
Mhm.
that's what I was going to do. And
Mhm.
if change for my physical problem in my neck and stuff changed it, I probably changed tracks 4 or 5 times.
Okay.
And most people listening,
Mhm.
if you're along in your career path a little bit, you probably would have changed it at least once by now. And you will. People said theoretically, don't be afraid of change. It's one thing to say it on paper. It's another thing to actually practice and not be afraid and look for a way to make yourself stronger, actually. Third, you got to look at your skills and say, where is the place for me in this system in this time? What can I do to be needed? Right? That's partly why I did. I taught practice management because nobody was doing it. I thought to myself, okay, I've got this degree, I've got to use it. And I learned a lot about the business, you know, how to buy, sell practices, all this stuff. I wrote 3 MGMA books on it.
Yes, I was just going to mention it, that Dr. Satiani is a genuine bona fide expert in practice management, and he has 3 published books on practice management by MGMA.
So I was looking for holes of where there were gaps in knowledge for physicians, and that was part of it. So once you do a little bit of that, you got to teach yourself first. And talk to different experts. But once you do that, I think it's, you get known. People call you to teach or write or whatever, and it fills those gaps as you go along. Change tracks a little bit.
This is such a fantastic idea, by the way. You started by saying, I knew my weaknesses. Now you're saying there are holes in the system. There are holes in medicine. And who else is going to do it if we don't do it? Instead of waiting for someone else to come and fill it, having the passion to fill those holes. Dr. Satiani is an author of 6 books, not just 3. And he's a co-author of 13 of them and hundreds of scientific articles as well. So we are really listening to wisdom crystallized today, which is how doing these things in a system creates physician engagement. At the same time, if a physician takes it upon themselves that I will start doing these things, it creates happiness and engagement with life as well. So it works both ways. Even though the books are more written for a healthcare leader, physician or not, to how to create physician engagement, and in this case, by creating a pipeline of doctors to rise up or train them to get on the pipeline and train them, even if you don't want to be on the board, how can you lead other physicians? However, underlying those are the ideas that it is not only good for the system, it's good for the doctor. It's good for the patient, obviously, at the end of the day, because an engaged doctor is going to do better quality, better safety, better outcomes, and more happy doctor, having a longer career. Like you said, you had physical challenges and you were like, no, okay, well, we'll do something else. So, okay, we conclude this, and I wish we could go on and on and on, but this is such a fantastic crystallization of, and I think we're going to invite you in again, and we'll talk again about what more is there to learn, not just about medicine, not just about leadership, all about life as well. So there you have it. We talked about 2 things that every hospital does. One is trying to have a board, and a board which actually serves the community, the patients, and also the doctors, and how to do that in a way that engages doctors. And second is this new wave, and Dr. Satiani is the founder of the wave that we see in creating physician leadership, and how to do it in a way that it engages physicians. And of course, it doesn't put off physicians. It actually takes care of their needs, how to be a leader in a way that strengthens the system itself. So thank you very much.
Sure. You're welcome. Anytime.